Greetings from Stanford University. I'm Bill Barnett, professor at the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability and the Stanford Graduate School of Business.
Hi, everyone. My name is Milian Chen. I'm a rising junior studying Earth systems in the biosphere track here at Stanford as well.
And Milian and I are pleased to have with us Professor Tadashi Fukami.
Thank you. My name is Tadashi Fukami. I'm professor in biology and Earth System Science Department at Stanford.
And we have here Raven Alcott, who is now a candidate for her Ph.D. So almost done with the Ph.D. Welcome, Raven.
Hi, thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, and we're excited to have you. And, you ran as part of our conference series, a super exciting conference on Indigenous Stewardship for Sustainability. Now, Milian, you were at that conference. What are your reactions and what questions would you like to ask our conference chairs?
Yeah, it was really amazing being there, seeing all the people from all over being able to talk about their research, their experiences, and sharing their stories. I think it was really important that this space was created for so many people to be able to talk about what they're researching and what they're protecting. So that was really valuable to me. I think during one of the panel discussions at one of the end, one of the speakers was talking about how so many of the things happening at the conference would have maybe seemed impossible, like maybe 50 years before that. But being here and being able to present and being able to share their knowledge was something that is powerful. So I guess that sentence really resonated with me during the conference. So I guess I wanted to ask, what else do you guys think you accomplished that was amazing, that exceeded your expectations and was just great to hear from everyone?
Thank you for that great comment, Milian. Yes, we were very pleased how the conference went. I think Raven and I thought a lot about who to invite as speakers. And then what was important to one of the things that was important to me, to us, to both of us and to all of us is that we wanted to start with a local focus with the Mwakmoloni tribe. And we also had a Amamutan tribal band. Those are the two of the tribes, the indigenous communities we have around Stanford. It was important to start with their views. And then it was really nice to have international examples as inspirations because we had speakers not just from North America, but also from Chile and New Zealand and other countries. And so it was a way to have inspiration from different places.
Yes, thank you for this question. And I would just like to echo what Tad was saying. I think we spent a lot of time and intention in the speakers and their perspectives and their methods that they bring to land stewardship and land return and just that connection between people and land. And I think another thing, in addition to presenters, we also thought a lot about the structure of the conference and making sure we had opportunities for community building and for coalition building, hence why we had the panel discussions after certain sections to bring together voices and perspectives and just to build upon this vision of Indigenous stewardship for sustainability.
Wow, that is incredibly inspiring. And I'd like to ask each of you, if you could, to maybe talk about one example to help our listeners see the wisdom of paying special attention to Indigenous stewardship. Obviously, at some level, all of us would like there to be stewardship of the earth and the very idea of sustainability implies that. What is it? Maybe some examples to show what's special about Indigenous stewardship.
Great question. Thank you. I can start with that if it's okay with Raven. One example that I would like to bring up is by one of the speakers, Jacqueline Beggs from Aotearoa New Zealand, where in her talk, she talked about one example where in a remote island of New Zealand, the iwi, the tribe that takes care of the land and part of their ancestral land, they were given back the island from the government. But what happened was that instead of then saying, okay, so this is now finally this island is back to us, and just everyone we are in charge and don't mess with us. That's not what they do. They then requested collaboration with the New Zealand government and then other communities. And then I think the inclusivity is one thing that defines one of the characteristics. I don't want to overgeneralize, but often the indigenous stewardship involves indigenous communities who have taken care of the land for a long time. They want other communities to be part of it as well, but also show them, the rest of us, how to be sustainable, because they have the track record of being sustainable, and often they're really the only group. But that doesn't mean that they are exclusively just taking over the land, and because it's this ownership of the land is not is foreign to many of the indigenous culture anyway. And so that's one thing. Another thing is that, as I already said, I think that often the indigenous community is the only group where they have done sustainable living. And by experience, they have the mindset and wisdom that they can share with the rest of us to know how to live sustainably in each specific places with each culture developed there. So that's what I would say.
Well, that's very interesting. Raven.
Each of the presenters and practitioners, I feel like they were also beautiful in teaching us about Indigenous stewardship. One that I continuously draw back on or think about is Chastity Salvador's presentation. She is a Pueblo farmer and from Acoma, Pueblo, also a Stanford alum. And her presentation was about her work as a farmer, but also a doula. And I think a great, a significant message behind her presentation was this land-body connection, and how farming is medicine. And I'm sorry.
Oh, don't apologize. I'm actually quite struck by the very idea of farming as medicine. And what is meant by that?
Yeah. So Pueblo people are from New Mexico. I'm also Pueblo. Lots of our history and culture being in New Mexico comes down to farming practices and living with the land. And so Chastity's work just reminds us of that relationship with land and food and medicine and intergenerational sustainability. And I think, just this connection as farming, something you put your intention and your love for the community into it. That's also sustainability. And I feel like her presentation really allowed us to see that sustainability can take many forms.
It's interesting. I remember reading in Steinbeck, his references in Grapes of Wrath, his references to the mechanization of agriculture, and those passages where he describes the machine as tearing people from the land and separating them from the land. And I think sometimes we forget that those traditions are deeply human and still are represented by many. And it sounds like Chastity's presentation brought that out.
Yeah, I think along the lines of what was said earlier, and also what Professor Fukami was mentioning earlier about land revitalization, I remember one of the speakers talking about one of their campaigns to be able to access one of their islands that they were traditionally on before, and then it was an ongoing, maybe 50-year process or more. And how when they finally were able to go back to the island, it was just full of like used car batteries, just lots of things piling up and things that were definitely not great for the environment. And like being on that land and seeing like the trauma on the land as well as like the people returning, I feel like these moments are important to think about because it's like one step in the right direction to reclaim that land, but it's also not that easy. So I guess I was running off of the other speakers that were talking about the trials and the hardships of this process. If you guys had anything you wanted to add about that.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. In response, one of the talks that I remember that related to what you were saying, Milian, is by Veronica Figueroa from University of Chile. She's Mapache, and what she was saying is that she had this key word that she used even in her talk title called responsibilization without justice, meaning that in Chile, just like many other places in the world, the indigenous communities are now increasingly viewed as holding key to being sustainable. But the whole situation, the economic, social, political situation makes them just continue to make it very challenging for them to thrive themselves. But despite that challenge, they are expected to guide the community, and that kind of the disparity between the expectation they are now have and then the condition they are in, that disparity is something that's an issue to be resolved. And so your comment made me think of her talk.
Very much. Raven, it looks like you're reacting to that. Do you want to jump in on this?
We learned a lot about the processes of land return at the conference, hearing from Dr. Kutcha, Riesling Baldy about the island, also the Amamutsin, who created their land trusts to facilitate land returns and land acquisitions, as well as the Ohlone. They talked about their experiences. And so I feel like this conference was really helpful and useful in reflecting on those experiences and also having the opportunity to come together and just learn about different strategies and just discuss what tribal land acquisition can look in the future for tribal communities, tribal nations, and people fighting for tribal recognition in various spaces. And so memory and experiences are very important to sustainability. And I feel like the land back conversation at this conference was really fruitful. And I think there is a lot to come out of this moving forward.
That's incredibly inspiring. I can say as a person who has learned so much from, I know from you, Raven, as when you visited my class, and from you were just you folks were just mentioning Veronica de Lourdes Figueroa Hincho. She introduced me to the Mapuche some years ago, and I have been struck by the tremendous courage of the people in many ways being confronted, the Mapuche being confronted with the need to be responsible, take over much of the responsibility for land stewardship. I do love that she uses this word, responsibilization, right? Because it's happening in a sense to them without justice. When you look at the tremendous plight that was left by in certain parts of Chile by the movement towards industrialization, both for industry and for agriculture, that affected the Mapuche so severely. And there they are fighting the good fight, despite those unequal costs. There's a lot of discussion these days about the idea of revitalization. It's a very inspiring, forward-looking idea. I know there were some talks on that in your conference. What is meant by revitalization? I think I understand, but I feel like I should ask it more as a question.
Yeah, thank you for this question. And please let me know if I'm interpreting this wrong, but are you referring to land revitalization or cultural
Yes.
revitalization?
Well, actually, take it in either direction because maybe they are part of the same idea.
Yeah, I think revitalization is a huge topic and point of conversation in these dialogues, especially given the settler colonial history that has happened and is occurring and ongoing. Revitalization is an important topic when it comes to land and culture because those are often intertwined. And so when we have a history in which those are separated and those structures to disconnect land and people are sustained, revitalization is a action that connects those and bridges those and offers opportunities for healing. And so I think a lot of the topics that we did talk about were a lot about healing and emotions and honoring those emotions as a way to have direction in these research pursuits about Indigenous sustainability. Yeah, thinking of revitalization as just this moment to reconnect, reground, and realign. Yeah.
I see. That helps me very much. Do you want to reply to that as well, Tad?
Yes, I do. And thank you. I think how two of you were asking each other about land versus culture revitalization is a very interesting one because I think, as Raven just said, I think my understanding is that one essence of the indigenous revitalization is the tight link between the two, land and culture. And I think of this concept of reciprocal restoration that's proposed by Robin Wall Kimmerer, one of the leading indigenous scholars, saying that if you restore people in how to be part of the landscape, then the landscape is going to be restored better. And then there's a positive feedback between land and culture. And I think that's really central to revitalization. So just agreeing what Raven was saying.
Oh, that's incredible. That's incredible. And it really speaks to the truth of what this idea represents and what your good efforts in creating this community around this conference brought here to Stanford University. And so I want to thank you very much, Professor Fukami, and soon to be Dr. Alcott, for coming on our podcast, and to my co-host Milian Chen. Thank you very much. And to all of you out there as our listeners, from me, Bill Barnett, here at Stanford University, until next time.
The Stanford Initiative on Business and Environmental Sustainability podcast series is sponsored by the Stanford Graduate School of Business and the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability. Music by Charged Particles. That's Caleb Hutzler, Mike Rock, and John Krosnick.